There was always a sense, a quiet, uneasy whisper beneath the surface, a tension in the air, subtle but persistent, like walking into a room and knowing something was off without being able to say why. Decisions seemed to happen, but not fully by choice. Words came out that didn't feel like they belonged. Actions were taken that deep down felt foreign. And in retrospect, it became clear something unseen had been at work all along. Moments passed by when favors were done unwillingly, arguments were abandoned despite being right, and trust was handed over to those who would later twist it. These weren't coincidences. They were signs. And once the pattern started to reveal itself, the reality became inescapable. This was manipulation. Silent, precise, and everywhere. From friends and family to leaders, media, co-workers, there were hands pulling strings, guiding behavior, shaping thoughts, all without detection. And the terrifying part? It was done in such a way that it felt like autonomy. Like control was never taken, because it was never noticed. That's the genius of true manipulation. It whispers rather than shouts. It offers a choice, but only one that leads exactly where it wants. Most people go through life unaware. They're being moved like chess pieces on a board they didn't even know existed. And when resistance finally begins to stir, it's quickly silenced by guilt, doubt, or fear. Emotional training from years of subtle conditioning kicks in. Don't speak up, don't question, don't push back. And here's a hard truth. The more someone believes they're immune to manipulation, the more vulnerable they often are. That's precisely what a skilled manipulator wants, to remain undetected, to be dismissed as harmless, kind, or misunderstood. This isn't a video meant to soothe. It's a warning, and more importantly, a manual. A roadmap through the invisible battlefield of the human mind. Because those who understand how to manipulate, how to navigate the emotions of others, don't need brute force. They need only understanding. They watch, they listen, they find what drives someone, and then they use it. That's the essence of control, not through domination, but through insight. And unless the patterns are learned, unless the hidden language of emotional manipulation is recognized, those patterns will continue to play out again and again. In relationships, at work, in friendships, even in quiet moments alone, haunted by decisions that weren't entirely one's own. Certain people always seem to get what they want. They don't push, they don't plead, they persuade, not with charm, but with technique, with deep, practiced observation. They don't act on whim, they study, they notice the smallest signs, a moment of hesitation, a longing for approval, a buried fear of being alone. Then they build their strategy around those cracks in the armor. Manipulation often begins in silence, before a word is spoken. It's in the tilt of a head, the pause before a smile, the mirroring of emotions. Some wear kindness like a cloak, offering affection, compliments, connection. But underneath, there's calculation. They know that when people feel seen and valued, they feel indebted. And when the emotional debt grows, the boundaries blur. Others play the victim, expertly weaving guilt into every interaction. A sigh here, a wounded glance there. They don't need to demand. They simply invite responsibility onto others, knowing that those with tender hearts will take it. And there are those who prefer fear. They paint visions of abandonment, of loneliness, of catastrophic futures, just vivid enough to be believed. And in doing so, they tether others to them without ever lifting a finger. None of this is new. Machiavelli himself, centuries ago, laid the blueprint. He knew that control doesn't come from strength, it comes from understanding human weakness. He wrote of the theater of manipulation, where the stage is set and the roles are assigned, and the audience never realizes they are part of the act. And the truth is, manipulation only works when something inside allows it. A gap, a need, a blind spot in the psyche. It isn't weakness, it's humanity. Everyone carries unresolved desires, quiet fears, childhood wounds that never fully healed. And that's where the manipulator moves in. They don't break down walls, they slip through the cracks. For some, it's the hunger for approval. carved into them from early years when love had to be earned. For others, it's the weight of guilt dragging behind like chains. And for many, it's fear, the fear of being left, of being unseen, of being alone. Manipulators don't invent these vulnerabilities. They exploit them. They offer safety and validation, and then threaten to withdraw it. They present themselves as irreplaceable. And once that belief takes hold, the cage locks shut from the inside. But none of these patterns arise out of nowhere. They're shaped by life, by pain, by silence. And as long as they go unexamined, they remain open wounds waiting to be touched. So, what's the way out? It begins with awareness, not just of others, but of the self. The internal landscape must be mapped, the emotional triggers identified. What causes surrender? What makes the voice go quiet? What fear dictates action? Once the patterns are known, they can be broken, not with aggression, but with intention. The next step is emotional detachment, not coldness, but clarity, the ability to witness without being swept away. Compliments no longer become truths. Guilt no longer becomes a command. Empathy becomes tempered with perspective. Then comes unpredictability. The manipulator thrives on routine, on knowing how someone will react. When the expected reaction is removed, the game falters. The illusion cracks. Saying no when a yes is expected, remaining silent when conflict is baited, that's how the spell is broken. And at the foundation of it all lies identity, a solid, unshakable sense of self. The more it is known who one is, the less there is a need for others to define it. And when that need disappears, so does the manipulator's grip. This is not instant. It's not easy, but it's possible. And it starts with the courage to look inward, to question not just others, but one's own motives, reactions, and fears. This is training, a new way of seeing, of being, of protecting the mind not with walls, but with wisdom. Emotional immunity was never born from a single video or an inspiring quote. It was forged in silence, through the relentless practice of self-observation, through resisting the addictive urge to please, and through standing firm in decisions, even when the air became thick with disapproval. It was learned through the quiet reminder that mental integrity owed no debt to anyone, and that remaining sane in a world that feeds on emotional chaos had become an act of rebellion in itself. There was a time when an old line from Machiavelli began to make haunting sense, that men must be pampered or destroyed, for if merely offended, they would take revenge. Cruel, yes, but buried within was a ruthless truth, one that many fear to face. In the brutal theater of emotional power, neutrality did not exist. Either one took command of the emotional field or became a pawn on someone else's board. But the theory cracked under pressure when the manipulator wasn't a distant enemy. What if that figure wore familiar faces, shared a home, a bed, a memory? What if the strings of control were pulled by someone once called love? That was the battlefield few prepared for, the quiet war that happened in kitchens, bedrooms, family dinners, and office corridors. And in that battlefield, the weapons weren't loud. They were disguised, whispers that sounded like care, gestures masked as loyalty, affection wrapped around control. There, manipulation didn't scream. It hinted. It didn't forbid. It guilt. And slowly, the mind stopped questioning. The spirit bent to avoid conflict. The eyes learned to read moods, to anticipate storms before they hit. All in the name of peace. Yet, what looked like peace was a prison, built with bricks of obligation and cemented by the fear of being alone. In romantic relationships, the line often echoed, "I only do this because I love you." But love that demands obedience isn't love. It's a leash. In families, tradition became a weapon. You can't do this to your mother. As if respect born from guilt was ever true respect. At work, loyalty turned into leverage. Be grateful. Who else would give you this opportunity? Gratitude twisted into debt. But closeness never justifies emotional trespassing. Love does not give anyone the right to reshape another person with fear. And yet many endured it, because breaking that cycle meant accepting a hard truth. Not every act of love is healthy, not every person who loves knows how to do so freely, and not every bond that holds is a safety net. Sometimes it's the very weight that keeps one from growing. So, the journey began with boundaries that didn't need justification. A quiet, confident no that held more power than 1,000 defenses. Then came exposure, naming the manipulation, describing the impact, declaring the line. Not to change the manipulator, but to reclaim one's own voice. And then resistance when the backlash came, the insults, the silence, the guilt trips. But the truth was simple. The manipulator thrived on hesitation. The more one explained, defended, or delayed, the more power they gained. Real strength? It was in walking away. It was in letting the other confront their own emptiness without stepping in to rescue. That was the harshest act of love, and perhaps the most necessary, because only those who broke free from toxic patterns could begin to see with a new vision, one that pierced through masks and saw beyond charming words and feigned intentions. And that was when the next stage arrived, how to apply Machiavelli's cold, strategic insight in a modern age where manipulation had become invisible. Machiavelli never wrote to sound noble. His words weren't kind, but they were honest. He understood the game, how perception mattered more than truth, how the player who read people better than they read themselves always stayed ahead. To survive today, that mindset had to be adopted, not with cruelty but with clarity. In a world of carefully crafted narratives, political, personal, commercial, emotional survival required cold analysis and radical honesty. Kindness without discernment? Naivety. Honesty without timing? A trap. Altruism without limits? Servitude. The only path forward began with observation. Watching not what people said, but what they repeated. Not what they promised, but what they avoided. Not how they looked when speaking, but how they acted when they thought no one was watching. Then came silence, not as retreat, but as control. The manipulator expects noise, reactions, drama. Silence confuses. Silence breaks the rhythm. Silence gives back control. And from there, a new language was spoken, strategic ambiguity. Machiavelli had taught that to maintain power, one must appear virtuous, even if it was only a mask. The same applied now. Adapt, pivot, blend, but never dissolve. The essence remained intact, hidden from those who hadn't earned access. And above all, ownership of the emotional state became sacred. The manipulator needed doubt to thrive, but stability, the kind that didn't tremble under guilt or fear, made control impossible. The words of Machiavelli rang true once more. To follow the path of the greats, even if one never reached their heights, was still better than being left behind, clueless and controlled. With that understanding, one truth echoed louder than all. Full control of the mind was the final frontier. And unless it was claimed, someone else, an ideology, a memory, a lover, even society would claim it. Often, the manipulator wasn't a villain, but a parent's lingering voice, a partner's subtle withdrawal, a culture's unspoken rule. Manipulation wasn't always external. Sometimes it was internal. A belief, a fear, a story accepted without question. Real freedom began the moment the illusion of free will was shattered, revealing the chains disguised as choices. But breaking them required sacrifice, the loss of comfort, the end of false harmony, the solitude that came after saying no more to people who once shaped one's world. Freedom meant rejecting the need to be liked, to be seen as good, to be endlessly available. It meant standing tall while others pouted, raged, or walked away. And finally, it meant meeting the manipulator's gaze, whether in the mirror or across the room, and calmly whispering, "This ends now." And now, with this knowledge, a decision had to be made. Ignore it and return to the game, unaware it was being played, or use it to rebuild a mind immune to manipulation, to become someone who walks forward while others spin in emotional cycles. For those still caught in emotional webs, the question remained, what was the moment, the flicker, the crack, when the truth became visible? When the mask slipped? Or was it still in the future, waiting to be seen? That question was worth answering, out loud, because speaking, it was the first break in chain. And for those ready to go further, to not just see, But transform, there is still more to explore. Because the ladder of knowledge doesn't just free, it elevates, and the climb continues. Thanks for watching. See you next video.